Some people choose their neighbors carefully. They drive by the street at different times of day, meet the people on both sides before signing anything, check the local crime reports. They do everything right. And then something starts happening that no amount of due diligence could have prepared them for. These are 3 true accounts from people who thought they were safe in their own homes, people who trusted walls and locks, and the basic social contract that says the person across the hall, or next door, or directly above you is just a person. They were wrong. Story 1 takes place in Portland, Oregon, inside a 4-story apartment building on the east side of the city. A woman in her late 20s, we'll call her Dana, moved into the building in the fall of 2019. She was coming off a difficult year, a broken engagement, a job change, and she was ready for a fresh start. The apartment was clean, the location was walkable, and the building felt quiet. Exactly what she needed. The man across the hallway introduced himself on her second day there. His name was Gerald. He was somewhere in his 50s, soft-spoken, and he seemed pleasant enough. He mentioned he'd lived in the building for almost 8 years. He knew everyone. The building manager trusted him with spare keys when residents locked themselves out. Gerald seemed like the kind of neighbor you'd feel lucky to have. The first sign that something was off was small enough to rationalize away. Dana noticed that whenever she came home late, usually after 10, the hallway light outside her floor would flicker off just as the elevator doors opened. Not always, but often enough that she started paying attention. She assumed it was a faulty bulb. She mentioned it to the building manager, who had it inspected. The electrician found nothing wrong. Then she noticed her mail. Not missing, not opened, just moved. She had a habit of leaving magazines in her mailbox for a day or two before bringing them upstairs. One afternoon, she came down to find them stacked neatly on top of the box instead of inside it. She thought she'd misremembered putting them there. It happened again the following week. By December, she'd dismissed both things entirely. Gerald had started bringing her packages up when they were left in the lobby. He would knock, leave them at the door, and wave if she was home. She thought he was just a thoughtful neighbor. She installed a security camera in late January. Not because of Gerald, because a bike had been stolen from the lobby storage room, and the building manager was asking residents to help monitor the common areas. She didn't check the footage for the first 2 weeks. There was nothing to look for. Then one Thursday morning, she was scrolling back through the overnight footage looking for something unrelated, a delivery she'd missed, and she stopped. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. Gerald was standing outside her door. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't doing anything. He was standing with his face close to the peephole, perfectly still, staring directly into the lens of her camera without apparently knowing it was there. She watched for another minute before the footage cut forward. Gerald didn't move the entire time. She checked the previous nights. Tuesday, 2:12 a.m. Same position, same stillness. Saturday before that, 3:04 a.m. Gerald standing at her door in a dark hallway for what turned out to be 2 hours and 18 minutes. She counted 7 separate instances across the previous 2 weeks. When she confronted Gerald in the lobby the next morning, his face didn't change. He said he'd been sleepwalking since he was a child. He apologized. He said he'd see a doctor. He seemed genuinely embarrassed. She might have believed him. Sleepwalking is real. People do strange things in that state. But she went back and watched the footage again that night. Frame by frame, the way you do when you're looking for something you don't want to find. Gerald's eyes were open, and they were fixed on the peephole the entire time. She was out of the building within 3 weeks. She didn't tell the new tenant why she was leaving. only that she'd found a better place. But the new tenant found her on social media 8 months later. The message was 4 words long. "It's happening to me." Dana never responded. She still doesn't live alone. Story 2 moves to a rural county in eastern Kentucky, sometime in 2017. A couple, we'll call them Mark and Jess, had been looking for a property outside the city for almost 2 years. They wanted land, quiet, something with a history to it. The house they found had all of that. 4 acres, a detached barn, a creek running along the back of the property. They made an offer the day they saw it. The neighbors, Carl and Estelle, had lived next door for over 30 years. Their farmhouse sat about 200 yards away through a tree line. When Mark and Jess introduced themselves before closing, Carl shook Mark's hand and said almost nothing. Estelle smiled and said they hoped the new owners would be happy there. The first problem surfaced 2 months in. There was a worn path cutting diagonally across the back corner of Mark and Jess's property, leading from the tree line toward a gate in the field. Mark noticed it and looked into it. The previous owners, it turned out, had given Carl informal permission to use it to access a lower field decades ago. There was nothing in writing, no legal easement. Mark was willing to work something out. He brought it up with Carl in a friendly conversation. Carl looked at him without expression and said the path would stay. That was the end of the friendly part. Over the next few weeks, small things began happening. A dead crow on the front porch, which could have been a cat. Then a dead rabbit, which could have been anything. Then a third animal, something small and unidentifiable, placed carefully on the welcome mat rather than dropped there. Placed. Jess called the county sheriff's office. The deputy who came out walked the property, noted the fence line, and told them neighbor disputes were civil matters. He suggested they contact a lawyer. In September, every window on the south side of the house was cracked. Not broken, cracked. Single lines radiating from the center of each pane, as if something had struck each one at the exact same point. All 4 windows. The glass company who came to replace them said the pattern was unusual. Normally, a window hit from outside breaks more chaotically. These looked almost like they'd been stressed from within. The insurance company paid out without issue. No one explained the cracks. The child's shoe appeared in October. Left on the front step, a small sneaker, maybe a size 4, facing the door. Mark and Jess had no children. Carl and Estelle had no grandchildren that anyone in town seemed to know about. Mark took it to the sheriff's office. The deputy logged it and said he'd look into it. No one ever followed up. Mark installed 4 trail cameras across the property in November. He framed them toward the path, the barn, and both approaches to the house. He checked the footage every morning while Jess was getting ready for work. On November 19th, the barn camera picked up movement at 3:11 a.m. The barn was unlocked. They hadn't thought to lock it. Carl walked in through the side door with a flashlight, crossed to the center of the space, switched the flashlight off, and stood in the dark for 40 minutes. He didn't touch anything. He didn't look for anything. He stood in the middle of an empty barn in the dark at 3 in the morning and then walked back out the way he came. Mark drove to the sheriff's office that day with the footage on his phone. The deputy watched it twice. He said trespassing at night was a misdemeanor. He said he'd have a conversation with Carl. Whatever that conversation was, it didn't help. The motion sensor on the barn camera triggered 4 more times over the next 6 weeks. Mark and Jess listed the house in January. They sold it quickly and moved back to the city. The real estate agent, who had also handled the original sale, called Jess after closing to apologize. She said she probably should have mentioned it earlier. The previous owners had left for the same reasons. She said Carl and Estelle had been there for so long that everyone had just stopped talking about it. Mark kept the trail camera footage. He's never posted it publicly. When people ask him why, he says he doesn't want Carl to know where he lives now. The third story is the one that people who know all three of them find hardest to stop thinking about. Her name was Rachel. She's given permission for her real first name to be used, and she moved into a mid-rise apartment building in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago in the spring of 2021. 6th floor, a corner unit, good light. The building was newer, well managed, the kind of place that felt safe because everything worked, and everyone who lived there seemed like a normal professional going about their normal life. There was one unit she noticed immediately, though not for any specific reason. Unit 4B. One floor directly above her own apartment, in the same corner position. She noticed it because the door had a slightly different look to it. No mat, no nameplate, no personal touches of any kind. Just a clean, blank door. She asked the building manager about it during her first week. The manager said 4B had been vacant for about 2 years. The previous tenant had broken their lease, and there'd been some water damage from a pipe issue that the building was still in the process of repairing. She said it would probably be listed again by summer. Rachel didn't think about it again. The footsteps started in June. She'd been in bed around midnight when she heard them. Slow, measured steps directly above her, moving from one end of the apartment to the other. She assumed someone had moved in without her noticing. She wasn't bothered by it. Buildings make noise. People keep odd hours. But she checked the hallway the next morning. The door to 4B looked the same as it always had. Blank, undisturbed. She asked at the front desk, still vacant. She mentioned the footsteps to the manager. A maintenance worker went up and walked through the unit. Nothing. No sign of entry. The windows were locked from inside. The only way in was through the front door, which had a building lock and required a fob. The footsteps came back the following Thursday. Rachel started keeping a log. Dates, times, duration. Between midnight and 3 in the morning, roughly 3 nights a week, slow, deliberate steps moving back and forth above her bedroom. She left a recording app running on her phone and captured 12 minutes of clear, unmistakable audio. Footsteps, pausing, resuming, moving with intention. The building manager listened to the recording and looked genuinely uncomfortable. She sent 2 maintenance workers up to 4B in mid-July. They spent 20 minutes in the unit and came back with nothing to report. Structurally fine. No signs of anyone having been inside. Then, on the night of August 4th, the footsteps stopped. Not faded, not gradually slowed. They stopped directly above Rachel's bed and did not move again. She lay awake for 2 hours, waiting. Nothing. She fell asleep eventually, and when she woke up, the silence above her felt different from any silence she'd experienced in the apartment before. She said later that the best way she could describe it was the feeling of being watched by something that wasn't moving. She checked her recording. She'd left the app running through the night. The footsteps had stopped at 1:22 a.m. The audio from 1:22 a.m. until her alarm at 6:45 a.m. was completely clean. No footsteps, no building sounds, no ambient noise of any kind. 5 hours and 23 minutes of perfect silence in an apartment building in the middle of Chicago. She went upstairs herself that morning and stood outside 4B for a long moment before going back down. She called the building manager and asked her directly, plainly, to please come and open the unit with a master key while Rachel was present. The manager agreed. They went up together on the afternoon of August 7th. The apartment was empty, clean, undisturbed, exactly as a vacant unit should look. The water damage the manager had mentioned had been fully repaired at some point. The floors were bare. The windows were clear. In the center of the main room, facing the window, there was a single wooden chair. The building manager stood in the doorway and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said she would have to check the inspection logs. The last logged interior inspection of 4B had been 3 weeks earlier, on July 17th. The inspector's report noted no furniture of any kind in the unit, an empty space awaiting listing. The chair was never explained. No one on the building staff claimed to have brought it in. The building's entry logs, which tracked fob usage on every door, showed no access to 4B between July 17th and August 7th. Rachel moved out at the end of August. She said she wasn't frightened exactly. She said the word she kept coming back to was wrong. Everything about it felt deeply, specifically wrong in a way she couldn't articulate and couldn't let go of. She still has the audio recordings. She says she listens to them sometimes, not to figure anything out, just to confirm that she didn't imagine it. The chair is still in the building's maintenance log as an unresolved item. Last updated August 2021. No explanation recorded. If you've had a neighbor experience you can't explain, something that has stayed with you the way these stories have stayed with the people who lived them, drop it in the comments below. Describe what happened, where you were, and what you think it was. The best ones become future videos.